Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Be Healthy Summit and welcome to my friend Josh Summers.
Hey, Stephanie, how are you doing?
Great, thank you. How are you, Josh?
I'm pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome, good to have you on. Josh is a yin yoga teacher, a licensed acupuncturist, and a meditation instructor. He leads workshops, trainings, and retreats throughout the United States and Europe. He offers a unique perspective to the practice and education of yin yoga in that he is a practicing acupuncturist of 15 years and a dedicated Dharma practitioner for 20 years. So happy to have you on, Josh.
Yeah, my bio makes me sound old.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
My story, I'm just a guy trying to do right in the world. I think what you mean is, how did I get into acupuncture and yin yoga? My basic answer on that is that, I think like most people, sometimes the things we get into are ways that we're trying to resolve kind of a conflict or a crossroad, an impasse in our life. And for me, as I try to pinpoint it, I think that when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I slipped into a kind of depressive existential angst of some sort where more or less things were going okay in my life, but there was a profound lack of core meaning and sense of, I didn't have a sense of what might lead to a kind of rugged or deep fulfillment in whatever I was doing. So that precipitated a kind of personal crisis, which is not dissimilar to what other people go through, where they go onto a search looking for something to bring about a resolution to their disquietude. And for me, that took on the form of yoga and meditation, and then ultimately that led into pursuing acupuncture. But I found myself at one point teaching English in Taiwan as a second language, and my back had gotten into a bit of a spasm from something I was doing in my yoga practice. And when I went to the hospital in Taiwan to receive treatment for my back, I was basically at a crossroads. They said, you can go into the acupuncture clinic or you can go into the Western clinic. And I thought, well, when in Rome, why not try acupuncture? And I was really impressed with how effective it was for my back. And when I shared my results with my mother, who was a nurse practitioner, my mother, who's also desperate for me to have some sort of career direction, kind of prodded me and said, you could become an acupuncturist. You could study that back home. And a kind of light bulb went off for me. It never, coming out of university, it never occurred to me that somebody could become an acupuncturist. It was the only options really I was made aware of were either education or law school or business school or med school. And those career avenues didn't really appeal to me, but acupuncture seemed like a really interesting intersection of many of my interests already related to complementary health and yoga and meditation. So it was sort of felt like a homecoming of sorts, and that sort of got me into where I am now.
Cool. So what exactly happens to us when we do acupuncture?
We get healthy. Short answer. So this is, again, maybe I clarify your question. Are you asking about what the mechanism of how acupuncture works is?
Yes. Why don't you go into that, please?
Okay. Well, I don't have whenever a patient asks me that question, my first and most honest answer is I don't know. So I don't usually because the question presupposes that or suggests that they're asking for the kind of the physical mechanism that explains how acupuncture works. Like what's going on physically when the needle is inserted, and like what happens to tissue, or what happens to nerve conductance, or what happens to circulation. But there's some attempt behind the question to try to isolate what is the specific physical change that is precipitating an improvement in the physical disturbance of health. And that's a tricky thing because that's not how the Chinese conceived of their medicine. And it is just a loaded can of worms in terms of how a Western model of research would actually be able to figure out what that mechanical relationship was to acupuncture's efficacy, because and we'll probably get into this in our conversation, but the very way of diagnosing and approaching patterns of disharmony or disease is dissimilar from the way a Western scientific model works. So there's kind of a clash of paradigms, I think, where the Western paradigm either refutes or in some sense exonerates the traditional approach, but it's using a method of examination that the traditional approach doesn't necessarily reveal itself within, like the power and the efficacy of the traditional approach may not, and probably doesn't come out looking very good in a reductionistic model of scientific study. So maybe to qualify that a little bit, and I think you and I got into this a little bit in the conversation we had when you came on my podcast, and this was also fleshed out in my conversation with Dr. Timothy McCall when I had him on my podcast, but Western science or Western medicine will see a symptom, say, such as headaches, and then try to figure out what is the specific cause giving rise to that headache. And if you can figure out what the specific cause is, you just simply treat that cause and the headache pattern goes away. So you could test a certain medication against a placebo or a control trial to see if that medication is effective at reducing the symptom of headache presentation. And that's why a lot of people through the Western model have come to think about their health. What is the specific X that's causing Y? When you come to Chinese medicine or any of the more traditional holistic medical models, the symptom of the headache here is part of a network of other symptoms that indicate a particular unique pattern of disharmony. And the Chinese medical practitioner, their intention is to help rectify or correct for that pattern of disharmony. So they're not really treating the symptom per se, they're treating the energetic disturbance that leads to the arising or the manifestation of that symptom. And so with something like headaches, within the Chinese model, you might have just roughly maybe 6 to 8 patterns of disharmony that are written up in the textbooks that would lead to the presentation of that symptom. But because the underlying pattern of disharmony was unique and different between them all, the acupuncturist would address the pattern specifically with a prescription of needles or prescription of points that would be selected. But their actual way of treating would be different from person to person with that same headache, depending on what the pattern the person had was. And that's just a very difficult thing to evaluate in the double-blind randomized trial, because when you let Chinese acupuncturists treat the way they were trained to treat people, you can't isolate just one variable. You're dealing with a whole sort of symphony or collection of variables working in harmony together, not in isolation. And that ultimately would probably be better tested under evidence-based or outcome-based models of research. But the double-blind randomized trial is just going to reveal probably suboptimal effects of acupuncture every time it's looked at in that model. If that's I said a lot there. I don't know if you want to unpack any of that or open it up more.
Well, yeah, but it's necessary to understand the difference. Do you think it makes sense to do it both together, Western medicine and TCM? Does that make sense at all?
Sure. Yeah. And I want to be clear. well, the original question was, how does acupuncture work? So I'll try to weave that into my answer here. But in defending Chinese medicine within its own paradigmatic way of interpreting disease and what needs to be done to rectify that disease to promote health, I am not anti-Western medicine by any stretch either. I'm married to a physician. My sister's a physician. And while we may have some differences of opinion on a few things, I definitely see Western medicine having a vital role, particularly if you get an infection, you need antibiotics, or you need this trauma and you need a surgery, or penicillin, basic things like that. It's really good. But for the more chronic, systemic issues that many people have, whether it's digestive problems or sleep problems or stress problems, the chronic things don't really seem to fare as well in the Western model. Like putting Band-Aids on things doesn't really get into reducing or addressing the underlying root disharmonies that are leading to this thing. So I do think they can work together. I think we're still at a phase of infancy in terms of their integration. But that is starting to change. I mean, I have Western trained doctors who are in my referral network who I refer to, they refer to me, and there's a more respectful understanding of what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, I think. Whereas, maybe 10 years ago, there was a lot more dismissiveness from the Western side, like, oh, that's just voodoo or quackery. But as we probably get into the research on the fascia offers I think an inviting, plausible mechanism for how acupuncture practice works, and I think the more that research proceeds, these conversations are going to be less fraught with conflict and more collaborative, and discovering. They will yield greater discoveries, is what I'm trying to say. But back to how acupuncture works, I mean, I've hinted at this a little bit, but the basic premise is that your body in a state of health should be able to repair and defend itself from stresses and what we might call bad chi or bad energy, stuff that could cause a pathological problem within the body-mind. So the whole system seeks to strengthen and enliven one's own energy, promoting the good circulation of that energy so that the body can repair and defend itself. If there's a blockage or if there's an insufficiency of a quantity of energy, that's where these kind of characteristic patterns of disharmony start to emerge, and then the organism becomes vulnerable to getting disease.
Yeah, and in yin yoga and also in acupuncture, we focus on the meridians. Can you explain what a meridian is?
Yeah, and here I'm going to borrow a phrase from Dr. Daniel Keown, who's a physician in England, who's also trained as an acupuncturist. He's kind of hostile now to the term meridian, and I kind of appreciate why, because it sort of sets the listener up to a misunderstanding or misperception of what's actually going on. If you think of a meridian, which I think was coined by someone from France when they were learning and sort of translating some of the elements of Chinese medicine earlier in the 20th century. But the term meridian sort of connotes this idea of a line on a map. And so as a solid line, it doesn't really convey functionally what's going on within it. And so Daniel Keown posits this idea that a meridian is really a channel, a small space between dense fascial planes in the body. And Dr. Helene Langevin, who I know you're aware of too, has also, at least in the upper body, she mapped the classical location of the channels in acupuncture to physical correlates in the body, and she's seen that there's a high correlation between the traditional location of the channel and planes of intramuscular fascia, so the fascia between muscles. or the fascia between things, the fascia between bone and muscle, or tendon and muscle. So it seems like if we're going to locate them, these channels are found in these planes of fascia. And I kind of, the way if I'm talking to a patient, I say that these planes of energy located within the fascia are can be thought of as the highest concentrations of energy or chi in the body, but they're by no means the only pathways through which the chi is flowing. The chi is flowing throughout the whole system. It's just that in the channel, the chi is more concentrated and more powerful, and it's easier to influence the texture and flow and quantity of that chi on points or control centers on the channels known as acupuncture points.
Okay, thank you. But when you insert the needle into the meridian or into the fascia, what happens then?
Well, good question. Again, my first answer will be I'm not really sure. Like in terms of, I don't know how at this point still how to explain all the myriad effects that are observable and reportable from the patients when they get acupuncture. There's lots of different theories around maybe it creates a micro trauma. The needle, when it's inserted, creates a micro trauma that elicits an immune system response that can have a systemic benefit. This woman I mentioned, Dr. Helen Langevin, years ago, like 20 plus years ago, did some studies looking at the fascia when a needle is inserted and manipulated. And I should qualify this. This is a technique that would be done in Chinese acupuncture. And acupuncture, like everything else, or particularly like things like yoga, just as we understand that there are many different modalities and many different traditions of yoga, the same is true in acupuncture. So for listeners, there tends to be a view that, oh, acupuncture is just this monolithic thing. It's the same wherever you go. And that's actually not at all the case, that there's many different styles of acupuncture, many different traditions, many different views on how to do it. So the system I'm about to describe is more of a Chinese technique where the needle goes in and then it's rotated back and forth very quickly. So it goes in maybe 3 to 4 centimeters and then it's rotated back and forth very quickly. And the idea is that, and this is what we're taught in acupuncture school, is that you're trying to stimulate the point to feel the chi arrive and grab the point. The language that the Chinese would use is that the needle's like a hook, and that the chi is like a fish that comes up and grabs the hook of the needle. And when that occurs, there's always a feeling that the patient usually reports of a kind of a grabbing, gripping sensation. It can feel dull, it can feel like a broad pressure in the area. As we'll get into in talking about with the connections with yin yoga, we could say it's a dull, mild, moderate, achy sensation at times. But what Dr. Helen Langevin showed is that when the needle is stimulated this way, rotated back and forth very quickly, the collagen in the fascia winds around the needle, like she says, like spaghetti winding around a fork. And then that exerts a micro stretch in the region, which has been shown to lead to sort of a cascade of physiological responses. One being the cells in the area release a signaling molecule that has an analgesic effect. So that's part of the mechanism or pathway that she thinks that acupuncture has pain relieving qualities to it. But she's also found that when the needles are left in place for roughly 20, 30 minutes, that there's a wide scale relaxation of the connective tissue, which gets to this broader issue of, or broader theme of the fascia being a signaling system in the body, and that a signal or a mechanical stress that's generated locally on a very local level seems to have a profound global effect through as that stimulation is mediated through the fascia. And that's what that study revealed. Now there are people who say, well, that can't be all of what's going on in acupuncture, because there are many modalities that don't involve the same kind of needle stimulation. There's Japanese modalities that don't involve the puncturing of the skin itself at all. Like there's touching needle techniques where a kind of a blunt needle just simply rests on the skin at the point, and then the practitioner is trying to channel or influence the energy with their own mental energetic intention without having the needle puncture the skin. So I would say her research is suggestive of something happening. And so those that need a kind of physical explanation, like there's a little bit of comfort in that explanation, but I also feel like it's not a complete, it's not the complete story. There's just a lot more probably going on than just that. And we have yet to figure all that out.
Yeah, true. There's so much we don't know yet. But still, energy just works. It even doesn't matter if we know it or not. It just functions in a way. So why do you think we say that yin yoga has a similar effect as acupuncture?
Well, that gets to, I think this has been one of your questions that you sent around to me, but I think the way yin yoga affects the body and mind, similar to the way acupuncture does, is very likely has to do with its influence on the fascial fabric of the body. And so the way you see or you hear some of the fascial folks talk about this global function, the global role that the fascia has, is that it's something they're referring to it as the richest sensory organ of the body. That there's more sensory nerve endings in the fascia than there are in the eye now. Or we now know that. And so it is this fabric of communication, so that every part of the body is able to be connected, literally connected as connective tissue, but connected to every other part. I was rereading recently a book, a fairly old book now, by James Oschman, called Energy Medicine. And, it's a very interesting book, but what I was appreciative of was that I feel like after studying fascia for the last 15 years, I feel like I can finally start to understand what he's talking about in this book and not be totally glazed over or out of my depth. But there's this idea that literally every cell is linked, every cell of your body, all the trillions of cells are linked up to each other vis-a-vis the fascial net. That there are fibers from the fascia that connect to receptors on the cell's surface known as integrins, and then there are protein filaments that connect from the integrin on the cell receptor through the cytoskeleton of the cell, the internal sort of structural components of the cell that go directly into the nucleus. So there's a way that the fascia represents this, as David Lazondak says. I think you're going to have him on your series here, but he talks about the fascia being this intranet, the body's intranet, through which everything is in communication with each other. So if there's a disturbance in the fascia, so let's say the fascia is thickened, or there's excessive fibrosis, or scarring, or adhesions, or inflammation, you get any of that going on in the matrix of the fascia, I can easily imagine how that creates obstructions or obstacles in the communication of every part to every other part. And then when there's a disruption in that communication, then the whole system becomes vulnerable to attack. It's not able to be in a state of coherence with itself. And it's open to attack. So I think anything we do to maintain the sort of the suppleness, the pliability, the hydration of the fascia is going to be beneficial at maintaining our homeostatic health. So yin yoga, the primary mechanisms I think that or two of the main ways that this will work, I think, is that if the fascia is contracted, which it will do under stress or inflammation or immobility, the practice of holding poses for a while in yin yoga will help to reestablish the healthy length and orientation of the fibers which are conducting this energy in the fascia. And also the gentle stresses of the poses will help change the phase of the watery material in the fascia known as ground substance. And this ground substance, or the gel of the fascia, when it's left immobilized, becomes stiff and harder. It becomes kind of like a dense gel, within which toxins and metabolic waste can get trapped and sort of held onto. But when it's stressed, when there's a gentle force applied to it over time, or if it's heated up in a hot yoga type situation, the gel changes from a more solid state to a more fluid state. And in that fluid state, the dreck that's stored in it can get sort of squeezed out and reabsorbed by the circulatory and lymphatic system to be excreted. But I also think, and this is me being speculative here, but I also wonder if in the more watery state, if the gel is not itself more conductive of the bioelectricity that is part of the signaling information that propagates through the fascia. So it's sort of, my sense of it is like there's like improving the organization of the collagen through gentle stresses of the yin yoga practice, and then also through a decrease in the density of the gel that I think leads to sort of greater conductance of energy. Now, that's also my subjective sense. So as a sample of one, and I think this is something that you and your probably listeners can relate to, is that after you've done a yoga practice, whether it's yin or yang yoga, if you've gone through your paces of doing your yoga practice, the end, there's just often a natural sense of ease and well-being. Like you feel kind of a sense of harmonization in your body and mind. But you're relaxed, you're calm. There's kind of a cool, tingling feeling flowing through. These are symptoms of good energy flow. You know, where the matrix of your body has been opened, and the chi or the energy can circulate unimpeded in an unimpeded way, and the byproduct of that is just a sense of ease, well-being, and the body's able to repair and defend itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are my kind of two big ones. But I'm curious, like also, you know, I know you're in the questioner role, but I'm curious if you have any other theories or ideas about what the mechanism of in relationship between yin yoga and the acupuncture might be.
Well, what I had amazing experiences with was when I focused on certain meridians or meridian pairs, which are connected to our organs, that amazing things can happen. One example was that I was night blind and I couldn't drive a car at night because it was so bad. And my doctor told me, well, there's nothing you can do. You just have to accept that. And you just cannot drive a car at night. And I didn't want to accept what he said. And then I said, okay, maybe you cannot help me with this, but I will keep on looking. And then I went to acupuncture regularly. And that acupuncturist focused on my liver and my gallbladder. And the liver is also connected to the eyes. And when I found out about yin yoga, I had my regular practice and I focused on the liver meridian for a couple of years. And all of a sudden my eyes improved so much, and I wasn't night blind anymore. Now I can drive a car at night. I still have to be careful. I cannot see as good as other people can, obviously, but I can drive a car now, and my eyes have even improved, even though I'm a lot older now. And I had that issue when I was 18, and I have no explanation for that other than my yin yoga practice on a regular level, of course.
Now, when you say, and this is I'm always interested in this too. When someone says they're targeting a particular pair of channels, you were emphasizing those channels, right? You were focusing on the liver and gallbladder, but you weren't exclusively doing those, right?
No, but most.
Yeah. That's sort of my view of yin yoga too, is that the practice, in a way, it supports a homeostatic balance. Like it supports the body to repair and heal itself, but it does it in a very general way. Like, you know, take for the liver channel, for example, which runs up through the inner leg. At least that's where we'd access it in a yin practice. It's not the only channel that comes up through the inner leg. There's two others, the kidney and the spleen, that also come through the inner leg. So it's my view is that we're not going to be working specifically on the organs per se. It's more we're helping support the qi flow through the channels so that the blood and the fluids can circulate well, and the energy and nutrients can get to the organs, so the organs can do their function, perform their functions, but also so that the communication networks between the organs are open so that they're able to function as a well-oiled team, if you will, and not get into states of imbalance. But that's what you're describing. Sounds great. Sounds really fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm
really.
sure lots of people listening will be telling their grandparents to get into the yin yoga liver gallbladder sequence so they can drive home at night.
Well, yeah, it wasn't only that. I had glasses when I was in 6th grade, and then I had to get new glasses over and over again because my eyesight worsened. And then when I started to do the regular yin yoga practice and the acupuncture sessions, I needed new glasses as well, but with weaker glasses. And now I'm not wearing any contact lenses. I don't need glasses anymore. I still use them in front of my computer with blue light blocking glasses, and I still need glasses when I drive a car, but that's it. I don't need them on a daily basis anymore. So that's pretty incredible, actually, I think.
Yeah. Well, and what you're describing, if we step back from it for a second, you're talking about how the Chinese have this view of correlation and connection in the body where everything's connected to everything else. But specifically, there's some stronger and more, I'd say, important correlations or connections to be aware of. And so the one you're describing is this relationship between the organ of the liver and the health of the eyes. So the eyes are viewed as the sense organ to which the liver sends its clear qi and blood, so the vision can be well functioning. But there's also, I would say that there's the literal nourishment of the eyes that the liver supply, but I would say there's also this figurative or metaphorical sense of it too, in that if the liver's energy isn't doing well, it tends to get blocked or become stagnant. But if it's not doing well, that might also manifest in someone's inability to see things from multiple perspectives. You can have a kind of a myopia of sorts, a short-sightedness, and only focusing on something right in front of you, or if someone's in a state of anger, which often occurs with the liver, they might be so gripped by their anger and a sense of self-righteousness that they just literally cannot take on different perspectives or have any kind of cognitive empathic position in something, and that can also manifest as an inability to see, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. I also have that in my book, the reflective questions, to just see what might be behind that issue.
Right.
But I'm glad that you mentioned anger, and can you go a little bit more into emotions and our organs from the view of TCM, please?
Yeah, well, this sort of gets into the correlations that the Chinese practitioners noticed a few thousands of years ago at least, in that, I'm trying to think of the best way to enter into this. Maybe the simplest way to start is just that in Chinese medicine, the basic view is that everything is made of qi. Everything has a certain quality and density / condensation / quantity of qi, I guess. And the qi itself, as it flows, also correlates to our emotions. So our emotions move with our qi. And if qi is flowing, we'll have normal emotional repertoire. We'll have sadness at times, we'll have joy at times, we'll have irritability at times. But these things don't really stick around or lodge too long. Like we're able to cycle through the normal human emotions, but nothing becomes kind of a chronic, long-term emotional tone / fixated pattern. But if the qi is stuck, for example, if you're not moving your body enough and your energy starts to become stagnant due to that immobility, that was observed to correlate to certain emotional patterns due to the stuckness of the energy. And often what comes up around that is that there can be a sense of irritability, edginess, or frustration, signifying in the Chinese model that the liver's qi is not flowing well, and then the emotional tone of irritability of the liver is manifesting. And so when they went through my sense of this is when they talk about the emotional tone with each organ, they just found that when that particular organ system is in a state of disharmony, that it's either weakened or it's too much excess, or there's some pathological energy affecting it. When that organ is not functioning very well, it typically manifests with emotional version or emotional aspects to that pattern. And so the main, in Chinese medicine, there's 5 main yin organs. Kidneys tend to manifest with fear when they're weakened or not balanced. The liver tends to manifest as anger. Spleen, if the spleen is weak, which is very common in Western culture, there tends to be excessive rumination, worry, anxiety. The lungs tend to manifest with sadness or melancholy and grief. And then the heart, those first 4 always sound negative, like nobody wants to be worried or irritable or fearful or sorrowful too much. But when they hear about the heart, the emotion associated with the heart is joy. And everyone's like, well, what's wrong with that? Nothing really. Joy is a good thing, but the way the Chinese refer to it is they do see it, certain kinds of joy as being symptomatic of a mental pathology. And what they're really referring to, I think, is kind of a manic joy, sort of this excessive, pressurized, manic energy that ultimately crashes and causes problems. So just to finish to come back to the question you asked, I think if the qi is blocked, so if you have a physical obstruction causing the qi to block, that could manifest as an emotional imbalance. So the emotional tone of that organ may come out if the energy is not flowing well. But vice versa, is you can be in a mental pattern. This is what I call a top-down influence. So you could be in a mental pattern. Say you're working too much and you're getting your PhD and you're just engaged in a ton of cognitive work. That cognitive work could have a negative impact on the organ involved with cognition, i.e. the spleen. And then you start to notice that your digestion starts to become impaired because of the weakened state from all that mental work. So whenever I teach a TCM module in my training, I say we can affect things from the bottom up. We can work on the level of the body to influence the qi flow in the mind. And we can also start from the top down and influence through our intentions and ways of relating to our mind. We can start to bring those intentions into the practice to influence the qi, the organ, and the body itself. And the reason I think yin yoga actually is so powerful is that you can mobilize both of those strategies. By occupying a pose, you're doing something physically to influence the qi flow and the matrix through which the qi is flowing from the bottom up. But then you also can, as you probably know, or as you teach, I'm sure, you can come into each pose with a specific set of meditative intentions to influence the qi and body from the top down. And the two just work, I think, beautifully together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that approach. Josh, do you have any other recommendations for energetic therapies besides acupuncture and yin yoga?
Big question. And I know that I saw that mentioned and I got a little anxious about it, mostly because I'm afraid of leaving something out and then inviting blowback from people. Why didn't you mention X? So there are lots of things that you could do, right? To influence your energy. I mean, Qigong practice would be good. Something you and I have discussed and that I'm increasingly curious and interested in is the practice of earthing or grounding, which just basically involves getting your bare skin, socially acceptable bits of bare skin, i.e. your feet, onto the grass, and getting in contact with the earth as a way of decreasing inflammation. And it's a whole nother topic. I'm hoping to get this guy on my podcast, but I forget his first name at the moment. Pollock is his last name. He's done a lot of research on the fourth phase of water in the body, known as gels, and what doing a practice like earthing does to that exclusionary zone of water in our tissue. So anyway, I think there's something very intriguing about all of that. But in terms of complementary, and I resist the word alternative. I encourage your listeners to also turn away from the term alternative medicine, because it's sort of, it signals that this is something less than. It's like the mail order thing you get when the visit to the doctor didn't work. I'll do the alternative thing. And whereas those of us in the acupuncture world and some of the other modalities prefer the phrase complementary medicine, that we're not just an alternative, we're actually something that's very helpful in complementing someone's healthcare strategy. Things I like craniosacral work, craniosacral therapy. I like Rolfing or structural integration work, massage. Are there any other things that I might be missing that you can think of?
Sure. Nutrition, which probably also plays a big role in TCM, right?
Yeah. I mean, nutrition really is, there's a whole school of Chinese medical thought called the Tonify the Earth School, and the earth element in the body correlates to the digestive organs in the spleen and stomach. So basically their view is that no matter what the person comes in with, you want to kind of analyze it, interpret their pattern in terms of how earth element is not able to meet the task at hand. So diet's really big, and some people even say diet's 80% of the treatment. Getting the person to eat foods that are going to remove obstructions and nourish the energy, nourish the organs so they can produce energy. Those are the two vital things that a good diet would want to do. But of course, a lot of the foods that we do eat create obstructions, and the term the Chinese use for that is dampness. That when food is not able to be assimilated and digested well, it generates this pathological energy that they call damp. It gets other terms depending on where it resides in the body. So if it gets sent up, it tends to get referred to as phlegm, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is a German word for that, Schleim? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a famous phrase in Chinese medicine that the spleen generates dampness and the lungs store it. So this dampness from bad digestion could manifest in like a lot of coughing of phlegm, or just always clearing your throat, a lot of mucus discharge, and particularly in the sinus cavities. So you'd want to eat in a way that doesn't produce all that excess damp. So staying away from cold foods, dairy food, excessively sweet food, and fried food. Those are the four. It used to be just the sweet, cold, and dairy. But recently, in the last century or so, the fried food thing has been an increasingly noxious element in people's diets.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people really lost touch with how to deal with that, because when I look around in the grocery store, I see people buying ice cream all year round, for example, or when you go to a restaurant, you usually get a drink with ice in it. It doesn't matter if it's summer or winter, and people just drink it.
Yeah. Right. And so this gets into the energetics of digestion. But listeners here may be interested in the whole notion of good digestion really rests on the spleen, and specifically the spleen's yang, the yang fiery energy to digest things. And so the basic idea is that if you eat things that are cold or difficult to digest, that overly taxes the spleen yang, and sort of your digestive fire can become diminished. If that goes on chronically, then it can go deeper into the system and start to sort of tax the reservoir of root fire in the body, which resides in the kidneys. And if you get down to that level, then you're going to get all sorts of kidney symptoms as well. And that's a sign that things are just really getting to a bad state. So the prohibition against cold and ice drinks and things like that is just to safeguard and maintain sustainable spleen yang. and not burn it up too quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And you get used to it. Once you start drinking warm drinks or just warm water, it might be weird a little bit in the beginning, but after a while, you don't even want to miss it anymore because it feels so good to your body, right?
Right. Yeah. No, and that's actually an interesting thing just to try. I remember, I haven't done it recently, but I remember once someone advocating that just the first thing you do when you wake up, boil some water, add a pinch of Celtic sea salt into it, and sip that for a while. And as I hear you talk about it, I'm like, why did I ever stop doing that? Because it really is. You immediately feel like the only word I can think is like you feel plumper, but not like like you put on weight. It's just more like you just feel like things are just a little bit more hydrated and more supple.
Yeah, exactly. I do that too in the mornings, and I also add some lemon juice. Some fresh lemon, of course.
Yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah. Josh, you're also into meditation. So can you please tell us a little bit about what meditation can do for us?
That's another big loaded question there. That's a good one. Meditation, yeah, I would say in many ways I got into yin yoga through the door of meditation, and that while I was in acupuncture school, I started sitting Vipassana meditation retreats, and which is Vipassana, for those that don't know, is a style of meditation that's traced back to early Buddhist practice. And these retreats are ones where you go and you're silent more or less the whole time, and you alternate your day through a very lean schedule of sitting meditation and walking meditation, sitting meditation and walking meditation. And the idea is to sustain your attention in a moment-to-moment way on the bare content of your experience. And the premise is there is that if you see very clearly into the nature of your experience, see the nature of your body and mind in a very profound, deep way, you come to an insight into its nature, which frees you from the ways that your mind habitually creates unnecessary suffering for itself. So I just say that all because my interest in meditation, my exposure to meditation is very much influenced by that tradition. And I know I'm versed enough to know that there are many different styles of meditation out there. Some involve sort of techniques to manifest particular things, whether it's you're trying to attract something into your life or you're trying to shift a particular emotional pattern or interpersonal dynamic. And my experience of meditation really isn't about any of those agendas. It's much more about just coming to understanding the deep structure of the nature of experience and how experience is created and built upon within the human mind. So, if I were to be very Buddhist on this, the main agenda or the main, the main motive of the practice is to precipitate a realization that the sense of self that you move through the world with, the sense of self that you're defending and protecting and trying to keep out of harm's way, that sense of self as being a separate entity from the world that it's in, that sense of self is itself an illusion. And that if you undertake a sustained exploration for the location of that sense of self, all you find repeatedly is that it just disappears upon looking. It's like this mirage that just vanishes when we look for it. And the more that is seen through, more that your sense of self is seen through as a transparent construction of the mind itself, not an actual entity or true aspect of reality. It changes how, the irony there is that it changes how your sense of self that's left functions. Like you become less defended, less selfless, or less selfish, and you feel much less disconnected from everything else. So that's been that's sort of my big picture overview of how I think about meditation. But what do you have any? I don't know if you have any follow-up questions on that, or
Yeah, if somebody gets curious now and says, okay, I'm ready, I want to try it, would you recommend doing it by yourself? And if so, what techniques should you use? Or would you recommend, no, better start with a teacher? What can people do?
well, the easy answer to that is there's lots of options for what people can do. And I think what someone does will largely be dependent on who they are, what their temperament is like. For myself, I started with books. I got going kind of the pre-internet days. We did have dial-up broadband, but I really got going with some key books, and then those books motivated me to go on a retreat. And I would say that the retreat experience solidified my commitment to the practice. It was in going on retreat that I felt both my understanding of the theory of the practice, but also my direct experience of the theory became very, very compelling. So it's a little bit like I had some really good recipe books, but then I really spent enough time practicing the recipes in my kitchen that I could taste what was coming out of them. And what I tasted was extremely compelling on retreat. So for people interested, I unabashedly recommend retreats. And people tend to be, if they haven't done one, they tend to be anxious about the silence, about the structure, about the duration of all the sittings. And my gentle recommendation is that most people will be quite good, will do just fine. It's not that the retreats are easy, like there's always challenges that come with them, but majority of people actually do find that the silence itself is one of the most delicious aspects of it, that the very thing they feared turns out to be the surprise delight. So I do recommend that, but also there's, as I'm sure you know, there's lots of apps available now that people can check out. And more and more there's teachers and groups that are meeting online, as well as sort of the more traditional meditation centers, and at least in some of the urban centers that I've been at, there's places people can go. But I do encourage people just to maybe get familiar with what some of the main options are in terms of styles of meditation, to do some research around that, and then to really try to make an informed decision around what tool or technique that they resonate with the most at this point, and just to go with that, and then stay open to the possibility of maybe changing direction as they get more experience. The one thing I would just say, and I feel like I need to say this given all that we're hearing coming out of various spiritual communities now, and that is just go in with eyes wide open and keep your hand on your wallet. Meaning, if things start to feel exorbitant, and if you get a whiff of a power trip from the teacher, be careful, because unfortunately, as we're learning, there's lots of communities that are riddled with riddled with dynamics of abuse, basically, whether it's physical or psychological or sexual. And I've felt pretty lucky in avoiding most of that, but it is definitely out there, and so people would want to be careful.
Yeah, for sure, it is a real thing. But I think people can also just sit down for maybe 5 minutes and watch their breath and just see what happens. And from there, they can go on, right? To just start with something and then see how long can I sit here. Maybe next day I want to do it for 10 minutes, and maybe I can just be in stillness and I don't have to watch my breath anymore, and just see what happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, you can get into specific techniques, and I think what you're getting at is that sometimes there's an idealization that creeps in the way people conceptualize what it means to meditate. And so somebody might have the idea that to be a good meditator, you have to sit down for 30 minutes every day and do a very specific technique. And if you falter at all, if you miss a day, or if you only get 15 minutes in, and then somehow your whole practice is shot to hell, there's no point in doing it anymore. Like the perfectionist problem. I'm with you. Like a little bit every day is much better than nothing. And in terms of sitting down and watching the breath, or just being still, I think my personal view on this, and again, this is informed by Buddhism, but rather than trying to curate a particular state in the meditation, like instead of trying to get into a particular state, say a calm state or a clear state or a thoughtless state, I think it can be much more beneficial to really for someone to sit down with a gentle attitude of just interest in what it's like to be them. So when they sit, rather than trying to control their mind, they could just sit for 5-10 minutes with an attitude of receptivity, which we could call a more yin quality or yin trait of mind, but an attitude of receptivity to the kinds of things that come up for them when they're sitting. And I borrow a phrase from, I think it was, there was a teacher, Norman Fisher, who was talking about recommendations for new meditators. And what I'm blanking on is whether he was talking about Soto or Rinzai Zen, but one of the Zen systems has this phrase about meditation is just what your mind does when you meditate. Right? So there is a little bit of circularity there, but I think there's value in knowing what it's like to be you. And rather than trying to get into a spiritually hygienic version of you, just to sit down and sit with, okay, yeah, I'm really annoyed by that email I just got. Let me sit with that and look at my reactivity and the things below it and behind it and where does it come up in my body. Like, I think there's a real benefit in just spending some time with oneself, independent of the minds of others, as a way to develop both the capacity for calm presence to what's going on, but also to develop wisdom and insight into the complexity of the dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I call it to invite your issues for drinking a cup of tea together. And no matter what comes up, okay, we are sitting down now and let's have a talk. And then just see what comes up from your intuition, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the precious practice, really. So Josh, I know this is kind of hard, but can you name the 5 most important pillars to stay healthy, to get healthy and stay healthy?
Yeah, those are hard. Actually, you gave me a whole page of questions, Stefanie, and this was the only one I wrote any answers down for. So now when you say healthy, I specifically intentionally took a holistic view. And this may not be a comprehensive holistic view, but I did take a holistic view, meaning I didn't just list things that I think will help you, ward off getting the flu. It's like when you talk about health, what does it mean to be a healthy, vibrant, alive person? So the first 3 do relate to the physical side of being more, and that relates to things like getting good sleep, which that's been implied, but we haven't mentioned directly, but eating well. So eating, sleeping, and moving would be my first 3. Like, you got to move your body, and this is not rocket science, but you got to move your body, you got to eat well, and you got to get rest. If those things are in place, we'll be doing pretty well. But the other 2, which I think I've really been reflecting on this more in my own life, given my very, in some sense, painful awareness of what technology has done to my life, or to our life, to the human species life. I feel like I'm dating myself here, but I do remember growing up in my teens and 20s, and not having a phone on me the whole time. And I remember what that experience of time and space and other people was like back then. And I would say there's many positive accomplishments of technology, but I think I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but I do feel like it's degraded certain aspects of civilization and civilized connection. So my fourth and fifth one are connect. And I intentionally leave that broadly because I think it's important to connect deeply with yourself, with your own inner world, which we're just talking about with meditation. But I do think increasingly we're isolated from connections with others, whether it's our neighbors or people on the train or friendships. And that's the irony, that Facebook and social media outlets that had the whole broad, at least in theory, they had the idea that they would facilitate greater connection. It seems pretty clear that it's the opposite has occurred. And, I do find it's more important to find real connections with real people, whether it's joining groups and going to classes or having more dinners out. But the connection piece, I think, is getting lost and is important. I know we've evolved as social beings and in need of that connection. And lastly, this is I would say probably more of a personal one for myself, but some others might relate to it too, is that the need to create. I feel like to be healthy, a manifestation of a healthy being is a creative being. And I use that term very, very broadly. It could be creation in the kitchen. It could be creation, in your garden. There's many ways to get into a creative activity of sorts. But I know personally that if that's missing, and it could be just the consumption of creative minds, whether it's the appreciation of literature or music, but if the creation element is missing, the creativity element is missing, I feel really dry. I start to feel like that the zest and juice of life is drying up. So that's my 5: eat, move, sleep, connect, and create.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Josh. Yeah, I love that. That's really nice. Okay, Josh, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom with us. And please let us know now where people can find you.
Well, online they can find me at my website, which is joshsummers.net. If they don't want to go to if they go to my website and they subscribe to my newsletter, they'll be gifted and thanks for their sign up, they'll get 2 short yin yoga practices and videos that I have put together, and also a kind of an email series that talks about some of the basic theory of yin yoga. But they could also find me on my podcast, which will be featuring you in the new year, 2020. And that's Everyday Sublime.
Yeah,
I think that's basically it.
I love that podcast. It's awesome, really awesome. And where's your practice? Where you do acupuncture?
My acupuncture practice is in Boston right now. I've been here for 15 years, really, since I started practicing. And the thing that's different is that because my teaching has become such a big part of my work, I've had to scale back my acupuncture practice. So I still have an office, but I'm there just a few days a month, really, at this point, keeping a steady core group of patients more or less happy. But it's definitely a scale back practice at this point.
All right. Well, Josh, once again, thank you so very much for.
Thank you for having me on. It's been always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. So many blessings to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Here.